To understand markets, you would think one needs to spend a lifetime studying complex theories, economies, and history, but believe it or not, today's economic landscape is relatively easy to follow. In the modern world, so much of the economic direction is dictated by essentially one entity, known as the United States Federal Reserve. They act as the gatekeepers of money, moving the levers up and down, controlling the single most important metric in the Western economy, the interest rate. Now you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with real estate? Well, to understand, we first start with a short story, and as we go through the events of the last 2 years, you will understand the full picture, a grim reality that is developing as we speak. You see, way back in 2019, the Federal Reserve had a problem. Interest rates were set at 1.5%, a very low number compared to the last 50 years. In the past, the Fed had a policy of slowly raising the rate when times were good, and then backing it down when we hit some turbulence. For example, in the early 90s, America experienced a recession, and in that time period, the Fed took the rate from 8% to about 3%, and when times got good again in the mid-90s, they bumped it back up to around 6%. This was the federal playbook. But the problem was that in 2008, when the financial crisis hit, the Fed lowered the rate to essentially zero and kept it there for a decade, leaving the economy exposed to the worst-case scenario. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, the Fed could only lower rates from a tiny 1.5% to 0%. So to jumpstart the economic machine and save America's workers, they pumped the economy full of money, providing forgivable loans to businesses that in many cases didn't even exist. They also sent out checks directly to your mail and implemented a vast array of other programs that pumped the economy full of money. And they did all of this by freely printing the dollar. Now, we knew from history that what would likely happen is inflation, but the Fed refused to admit defeat, calling it transitory. Soon, home prices, commodity prices, and basically all prices, including equities, shot straight up. From March 2020 to December 2021, the S&P 500 went up 105%. It doubled in less than 2 years. With it, many people in the upper echelon of society got very rich. Home prices exploded, and soon people were taking home equity loans left and right. The economy was full of money, and euphoria followed. But we knew eventually that what would happen is devastating inflation. Today we find ourselves dealing with the worst inflation numbers since the early 80s, and the Fed is behind. As of today, the effective federal funds rate is 0.25%, and despite this, the economy is faltering, showing signs of weakness. For example, GDP came out negative, earnings are showing signs of reduced consumer spending, the savings rate is down, and to make matters worse, plenty of stocks have fallen well over 50%. Now the Fed is in a tough spot. Raise the rate and stop inflation, and we push this already devastated economy into a tailspin, a serious recession that could potentially rival the Great Depression. On the other hand, they could let it go and allow money printing to continue. But then we would have inflation head to record numbers, a danger zone where we flirt with the complete collapse of the dollar. Jerome Powell is stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the reason he got himself there is explained perfectly by Scott Menard, who in a recent interview with CNBC said the following.
At a very unusual time in history. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about the pandemic and the Ukraine, but it's also monetary policy and fiscal policy. You know, here we are coming off a huge fiscal stimulus. We had a huge monetary stimulus, and now suddenly we're reversing course, right? They told us at the Fed that rates were going to be at zero until 2024. All of a sudden, we're going to raise rates. We're going to raise rates aggressively in order to fight inflation.
Did the Fed screw up?
I think so. I mean, they definitely overdid it in terms of supporting fiscal spending by buying all these bonds. And now, look, we've done this before. We did this during the Second World War. And so now we're coming out of this phase, but unlike what we did at the end of the Second World War, where we just said, okay, fine, we're going to turn off the printing press now, and let's let inflation run its course and come back to neutral. We're aggressively fighting it.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in 1946, inflation went to 20%. Right? By 1949, we were in deflation. They didn't tighten. They just stopped printing money.
But here's the thing with the Fed claiming it's going to fight inflation. The official rate is still 0.25%. I believe by the end of this year, it's going to be retreating from its push to fight inflation. At the end of the day, Jerome Powell would rather have inflation than a prolonged depression where unemployment becomes an issue for years. Like Scott mentioned, this country allowed inflation to climb to 20% post-World War II and simply turned off the printer while waiting for it to nosedive. You can see what is happening now with the presumed attitude that the Federal Reserve will raise rates. We have seen the 30-year mortgage go from record lows to nearly 6% in months. This has killed the refinancing market, it's killed the stock market, and it's killed liquidity in certain pockets of the market. El-Arian agrees by stating this.
For the Fed, orderly means, as you mentioned, market functioning. And so far, on the whole, market functioning has been okay. I say on the whole because those of us who look very closely at how the Treasury market operates have noted outsized moves on almost no news. So there are pockets of liquidity stress, but they're small pockets. So as long as they remain small, the Fed is not going to worry about asset prices as much as it's going to worry about controlling inflation. And they need to regain credibility. That credibility is very low right now.
Now, with the presumed notion that this is going to be the way the Federal Reserve will play this out, you have to wonder about these new stats coming out in regards to housing. There is no doubt that the mortgage refinancing industry is currently suffering. It's experienced a 70% drop from 1 year ago. For lenders, this is a crushing blow. Rocket Mortgage, a leading lender in the United States, is down nearly 70% from its peak. Yet despite this, home prices continue to appreciate in the complete opposite direction. You would think there would be some sort of correlation between lenders, prop tech companies, and housing, but it seems that they're almost going into completely different directions. To explain this, all you have to do is look at two charts. One is the population pyramid, which maps out US citizens by age. You can see here that millennials are the largest generation in America's history, and now in that part of their lives where home buying is becoming a priority. This buying pressure is unlikely to stop and will continue for years as the generation who has delayed marriage and children turns over and begins moving out of apartments and their parents' basements. And second, we have the lack of inventory. Across the United States, there is a housing shortage. Although the number has come down a bit from months prior, there's still many more months to go before we get to pre-pandemic levels. Unfortunately, to this day, most houses go over the asking price, and despite 6% mortgages, we are still seeing record buying pressure that is making the home buying experience miserable. Now, with that said, it seems that the only way this market will turn over is if the Fed does indeed rug pull, meaning they push rates up to obscene levels and force the economy into a devastating recession. On the other hand, if they play their cards as El-Arian predicts and let inflation run its course, then this housing market is only getting started. Thank you guys for watching. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it.